Hello everyone, welcome back to another session of API review. Apparently one of those windows here has the wrong one. Now it's fixed. All right, so let's see where we are. I think it's these guys here, right? And then we can just walk left to right. Steve, I think this one is yours. Can anybody else hear Steve or?
No.
Okay.
I was gonna say, if you're talking, we can't hear you.
Oh, sorry. I was still on mute. Apologies.
Gotcha now.
Okay, great. Yeah, so we were basically waiting for quorum, including Emo and Levi, to discuss this one more fully. I am representing some community requests rather than my own opinion here. We've shipped a whole bunch of these throw helpers now. We shipped throw of null or empty, etc. And then in .NET 8, we've added a bunch of new ones. I think 8 or 9 new ones as well. And there have been requests that these helpers return the same type that they accept, so that you could use these in a kind of expression context rather than a statement. There are pros and cons to this. Cons, we can't change the ones we've already shipped. We can only change the ones for .NET 8. Anyone who's using any kind of analyzer that makes sure using the return type will start getting a whole bunch of warnings if they're not using this in a fluent or expression style. Pros, cons, there's also, I think, there might be in some cases some perf impact, but it would be minor. Pros, you can use it in contexts where you can't use avoid returning. So you could use it in a constructor delegation, to base or to this. You could use it in a switch expression if that was relevant to you. You could use it as part of field initialization, field equals throw if greater than or whatever, and then you store it if it's not and get an exception if it is. So that's the question. Should we change all of the new ones we've added in this release to return T or string instead of returning void?
How many of these have we already released?
I believe it's 3. If you scroll up, yeah. In .NET 6, it was throw of null with object. In .NET 7, we added throw of null with a pointer and also throw of null or empty with a string. And then in .NET 8, if you scroll down, oh, it's already on the screen, yeah. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, I guess. So we've shipped 3, and there's 10 new ones so far in .NET 8.
So, I don't know about the analyzer personally, the analyzer being used by a lot of people. I feel like it would fire all the time with the builders in ASP.NET, but maybe people use it in other contexts. But yeah, I'd be for it if it weren't for the existing 3, because I like being able to use it in the expressions. But the inconsistency, for the most common ones, not supporting it, I think is enough to kill it, kind of.
Yeah, I'm personally not a huge fan of this either. There are places where I have my own throw helpers for limited context like switch patterns and stuff, but it's for those very isolated cases where like I'm basically working around the language. And given that throw if null is likely the most common of these by far, it not having it then makes it super inconsistent for the majority case of what people are going to use. So if we were going to do it, I would think we would want to maybe consider different names or not do it at all.
Yeah, the different names thing is probably what I would suggest. It seems very strange to me to have a method that says throw actually returns something, because my initial question would be, what does it return? Like, why am I supposed to do something with it? Like what?
Yeah, I agree. The throw if verb doesn't lend itself to having a return value.
Yeah, I looked later in this thread, and there was a proposal for having overloads, or not overloads, new method groups, a throw if that returns void and an ensure that returns t. And the downside to that, as was stated, was like, well, now you have additional, an additional cognitive burden, because now you have to figure out what the difference between all of these method groups is and when you might want to use one versus the other. But if people have to look at the documentation just to figure out what on earth the return value is anyway, even for a single method group, then we've already upped the cognitive burden regardless. So we didn't actually save anything.
Yeah, I still think we reject the proposal, but like I don't know what else it would return. Like I think I could rightly guess if I saw it had a t return value, but the inconsistency is terrible.
Yeah, and the other problematic case of having them return is that by default everyone's going to get a warning of, hey, you have an unused value here. And so they're going to have to change all their helpers to underscore equals. And so if it was named throw if null or return original value or something, that's at least clear. And you can disambiguate on, do I just want to throw or do I want it to return original?
So this by default thing, I don't know, right? Because like I've seen that analyzer for tasks, right? Like not doing something with tasks and then I have to do underscore equals, but like maybe the web defaults are different. I work in web a lot more. That's probably it. But
no,
the analyzer, I don't see those warnings.
The analyzer that warns for return values being ignored isn't on by default. You have to turn it on.
Okay.
I have it on in all my repos then.
You very well might. And in fact, that we have poorly named. Well, in my opinion, we have poorly named analyzer switches where like the documentation basically recommends effectively turning on a whole bunch of analyzers beyond what we have set defaults for, and I believe that grouping does include this. So there are a lot of projects out there where people just follow the recommendations and end up effectively turning on all the analyzers, and then they get these warnings.
Right. But I mean, this seems almost like an independent problem, though, right? Like we could fix that.
I suspect that analyzer is probably noisy for string builder right now, unless they special case it. But
since it's fluent and returns itself.
Yep.
It's fluent and non-side affecting. Sorry, it's fluent and side affecting rather than fluent and non-side affecting. So it's not like a regular builder pattern where it returns a new instance.
I don't quite know why it fires though. Like I mean, clearly we don't fire for every single method it returns a value, right?
I think if it's turned on, it warns on any unused return value.
Really?
And string builders just like, iService collection extension methods and iConfiguration extension methods and stuff like that too. They mutate and return this. It's pretty common.
Yeah, I mean, that seems like a general. I mean, there's a ton of APIs in the BCL, but you kind of ignore the return value. Like adding to a list gives you back the int, where it was added. Are you really gonna suppress that every single time?
List doesn't do that. Remove does tell you whether or not it was removed, though, and that frequently gets ignored.
You could imagine, if you wanted to pursue this, having an attribute that you could put on these methods saying, hey, you really are free to ignore the return value if you don't. But that's its own separate thing.
Yeah, I mean, I would almost say that's a different problem from this one here. Like we should, because that will be the problem for other APIs as well, right? So I guess the question is whether we believe in this pattern for this particular case here. I kind of agree with the naming situation. I mean, given that we can't change the existing one, it seems we would have a new naming group, but then are we really going to ship effectively dual APIs from now on, where we have throw if null and then whatever the other pattern is?
Ensure not null.
Yeah, ensure not null or get or throw or whatever we come up with, right? But then are we really going to ship two of them every single time? Just to make some patterns slightly more compact?
And the places where it is painful today to use a throw helper, like switch patterns, really seem like things that the language should fix. And improve on. That way you don't have that problem with switch patterns.
And is working on. Those are active areas of investigation for the language.
Do we have a sample for what the problem with switch pattern is?
If you're using the switch pattern and you want to throw for the default case, you can't use a throw helper because it requires all paths to return a value, return the same value,
gotcha.
same type rather.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, so then I don't know, like I didn't hear anybody being very gung-ho about this. And it seems there's just work.
Yeah, I like the idea of, for things like the switch pattern, just solving it at the language level or the runtime level. Because one of the other things that keeps getting floated around is like a never return type, which would solve this for a switch expression pattern.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that if the language comes back and they say we looked at this and we don't think we can make this work and we would rather have this be served at the API layer, then I think I'm fine with reopening this conversation. But at least I would take a look and see what they're trying to do there. I just think this is one of those areas where it's kind of neat, but it seems labor intense for something that is effectively just neat at that point.
Well, and if what's the current name of it? The new extensions, roles, trait, shapes proposal goes through, then users will be able to have their own package that effectively adds ensures to this, and then the community can just center around that.
Yeah, I mean, that one, I can see why we want, yes, but for error checking, you generally want something built in, right? So there is still some value in having something built in if that's the right pattern, but so far I'm not convinced that this is necessary, and it just seems noisy.
Yeah, I think if we proposed the list of everything we added in 8 in 6 when we were doing the original thing, and somebody asked about getting the return type, that we may have come up with a better name, but I don't think that there's enough value to offset the noise or pattern smashing that we would do at this point. So I think for better or worse, I think we made the decision in 6 without knowing we did.
We could do the Jared proposal, right? Like if we had that feature, we could basically say we introduce a new method that basically has the return value different, and then just mark the other one as, sorry, you can't do that anymore.
The binary compat only, which...
Yeah. Like, this is a very hypothetical feature, right? And it also probably wouldn't by itself solve the problem, because at the language level right now, you wouldn't be able to ship both the old and the new API.
I think that was part of the proposal of the attribute, is it basically compiles, but it completely removes it from overload resolution. So the compiler can still emit both because IL allows overloading by return type.
Yeah.
And the C# AST already allows that. It just fails in binding today for semantic reasons.
Right. Yeah, I mean, they could do that. I mean, if they were to do that, then I think if we just say, all right, we just don't change the naming convention, we just accept the fact that it's slightly odd, but it is what it is, and then we just say they all return a value, I think that would be reasonable. Because at that point,
Maybe.
it's just one set of methods rather than...
Yes. We'd still have the... It's weird that throwIf is returning something, but once it's, a T and your T is not capable of being exception, then it becomes pretty clear that it's not returning an exception that you're supposed to throw. So.
C# won't let you define an overload that differs just in a return value, right? It's not just binding; it will yell at you for.
It errors in the compiler at the binding phase today.
I see.
But C# technically does allow you to. It's called implicit and explicit conversions.
Yeah.
Since those are all identical IL signatures but differed by return type.
So that's special case for...
Yeah, it's the one special case that is actually formally allowed.
And you can sort of get it with interfaces and explicit interface implementations, but technically the name of that method has the full interface name in it. So.
Yeah, is that the YouTube chat? Someone points out that with the, types for lambdas now, that they're no longer explicit. It's a breaking change if you store it into a var or something.
Yeah,
as a lambda with the natural type.
Well, it says the only breaking change is when putting it into an action. That's actually wrong. If we change the return type of throwIf null from void to object, then anyone who had compiled against a previous version and loaded in the new version would get a missing method exception. That would be an extraordinarily breaking change.
Yeah, it's a huge breaking
language
change.
Level. Yeah. From the language level, it's if you recompile everything, it's fine. But from a binary compatibility, it's fundamentally breaking.
You couldn't have both overloads and keep the language only. Is there no way you could do it in a binary?
Only if you wanted to find it in IL.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. But that's the language changes they were talking about, right? To basically let you define it in IL? Okay.
But then Tanner, I think, said if you define it in IL so that you can do an overload, then the language won't let you call it because it doesn't know which two you want.
Right, and then the attribute. So I assumed it was in that scenario. You would still be breaking in some rare usages where you're using the natural type of the lambda.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, there'd be a whole big downstream thing, even with the compiler feature of, I'd like to replace my return type now.
Yeah, we're really just hypothesizing. It doesn't seem real at this point.
So then I'll be basically saying,
break between action and func calls. So. Yeah, I think we're saying we don't have enough reason to say yes, and we have a lot of little reasons to say no.
All right, then I guess that's what we do. I hate this. How do I change the reason now? I think like this, right? Close is not planned. All right. Jeremy probably didn't join because we didn't invite him. We can try, or we can skip this one.
I can do both. Invite him and jump to the next one.
is true. So I'm calling him. All right, let's jump to the next one. Eric also isn't here, I suppose. Oh, he is actually. Yeah,
I think he is. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm here, or if Stefan wants to take this, but I can take it.
Oh, please take it.
Okay. So the idea here is we have hosting APIs, and in, I don't know, let's say .NET 1 or 2, we added IHostBuilder, which had like these callback mechanisms. So you would say, like, I want to add an app configuration, and then here's the action to do my configuration, and I want to configure my services, and here's a callback to call when it's time to configure services. And then when you'd build your host application, it would run all these callbacks depending on, in a specific order. And then in .NET 6, in conjunction with minimal APIs, we kind of changed this hosting paradigm, or the API paradigm, of not having callbacks anymore, but instead just imperative code from the top down. You say, in ASP.NET, you'd say web application.create builder, and then you have, like, inline, you can say .services.add or .configuration, and get things out of the configuration, add things to your logging, etc. And it would all run inline instead of this callback approach. And so then in .NET, so that was in .NET 6, we changed kind of like how the ASP.NET main method runs. And then in .NET 7, we've also added the same API paradigm, if you will, to the generic host with HostApplicationBuilder. But we never did a common interface or common API over top of both ASP.NET's Web Application Builder and the generic hosting Host Application Builder. And so what this API proposal is to add this common interface named IHostApplicationBuilder that would be implemented both by the generic host Application Builder, and ASP.NET's Web Application Builder. And then there's a couple more follow-alongs with that. We have Configuration Manager is a class in extensions configuration. We would also add a new Configuration Manager, for the reason being is that Configuration Manager is in, like, not the abstractions assembly. And so we need an interface in the abstractions assembly that the hosting abstractions can reference. Does that all kind of make sense?
Not entirely. So I don't quite understand. So what does this? So basically, what it looks like, you're adding two interfaces, and you basically let them be implemented on existing types, right? So I didn't quite understand what that buys you in minimal APIs.
Okay. Well, so
Web Application Builder implements it, right? That's the big thing that's not shown here.
Right. ASP.NET will also implement this interface. And so did I put it at the top, or did I put it at the bottom?
Yeah, you put it at the very top. Like, that's what leads in, but
at the very top, like, we want to have people who build libraries, like, let's say Serialog or I don't know, Redis caching or something like that, right? People who build libraries to be able to add extension methods to say, like, no matter what kind of host application builder you're working with, here's an extension method to add Redis or to add Serialog or whatever. And today, since we have Web Application Builder and Host Application Builder that don't have any commonality, there's no, like, one place for people to hang these extension methods off of. I think I used steel toe in my example. Yeah, steel toe. So basically, before .NET 6, we had IHostApplicationBuilder, which was using this callback mechanism, right? Like, kind of like a no longer intended API. It's legacy, if you will. Like, it's not deprecated in any sort of way, but we don't want people continuing that pattern of like these delayed callbacks that get called to build up your application.
Okay.
And so this is the replacement for IHostBuilder. Because we had IHostBuilder, the interface before, and then the generic host builder and web host builder both implemented it.
So it's
And
not
those were all
just-
callbacks.
So it's not just the interface, it's actually the shape of this interface is different from what the shape of the existing type is like. It's just you omitted the implementations of those methods because it wasn't that useful, I guess.
Omitted what methods?
Which existing type, yeah.
So yeah, the way I read the proposal is basically you're just effectively extracting functionality that already exists on those types and just make them interfaces and then have them implemented, right? That's what it looks like. So
Right.
I don't understand why that changes the kind of code that you would write in, let's say, startup CS or programming
I
CS.
think it was
It's
the
not
host
for that.
application builder class was created to solve that problem. So we solved the problem in a previous version, and now he's extracting the interface to genericize it across the new thing and ASP.NET.
Right.
Right.
And like,
And it's not, sorry, go ahead, Stefan.
so I guess the other thing I point out is like in the original API review for host application builder, there's the question of whether web application builder would just derive from it. And we decided not to, primarily because build returns iHost instead of web application. Obviously, you could like create a new thing that fake overrides it, but we decided not to. But basically, like Eric was saying, there are library authors who would like to target this with extension methods. Usually we don't expect there to be like a ton of implementations of this, but host application builder and web application builder would be the two big ones.
It's not for people building applications. Like this interface isn't for them. Like they're either directly against host application builder if they're like a generic host app, or they're against web application builder. It's for extension methods like library authors to not have to. Right.
This is really just letting them combine add my library configuration and add my library services into register my library.
Yeah.
Because
more or
if
less.
they broke them out to the interfaces that exist, you'd have to call up to 5 things, and this is just saying if we have the same shape across the two builders, why can't I just make the one thing that calls all 5 in one call?
Exactly.
Right. And it might not just be, it might need to do different interleavings as well, right? You might need to add services at one point and then add logging at a different point. So
or read the environment when adding logging is like super common. Like, and there are ways you can kind of work around it. I like your point on build too, but I don't want to jump ahead. I was just reading that.
Right.
Yeah,
So the ASP.NET one has this exact shape. They can slap this interface decal on and everything will just work.
the build is the one thing. The build method, like Stefan said, ASP.NET's web application builder returns a web application from its build, where the generic host returns an iHost, which
Do you need build?
It's kind of the
I don't
core thing
think
of the
so.
builder.
I
No,
prefer
no.
without, I think.
The question is if the purpose of the interface is to allow libraries to register themselves into the builder, they don't need to call build. Only the person with the concrete builder type, whether it be the Maui thing or the web thing, needs to say, oh, now I call build. So I think build can just be left off the interface because it's not about configuring the builder. It's about finishing the builder.
Yeah, I thought about this, but it's the part that is hard is it's named builder and there's no build method, but I can get over that. It's just one of the warts, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, like for the intended use scenario, like I agree. Like that's part of my note on build is that it's kind of it's not used by the extension methods. We don't expect extension methods to call build. And then yeah, two, like the different things that want to implement this interface need a different return type here.
Yeah, I really like it without build. Like, I see your point on builder, but I would say like the extension methods are still building up the host. Like, even if they're not doing like the final compilation step. Like, so yeah, I mean, still buy the name.
I can get rid of the build method. Like I'm in keep builder. Like I'm not super strict against that. It just feels weird. Do you have thoughts,
Yeah.
Jeremy?
I think it's, I agree with, the audio comments here and Kevin's comment in chat that a type that says builder that doesn't have a method called build does feel a little weird, but I think in this case it's okay. So I would just cut the build method.
Just keep in mind that this is a one-time thing, right? So we better be sure that we never need it.
Well, so there's another thing at the bottom of the issue about diagnostics wants to eventually add an iMetrics builder to like host application builder and web application builder. And in extensions, we've gone down the DIM, the default interface methods path, which I would expect us to use here as well. Like if the metrics builder doesn't come in .NET 8 and we introduce it in .NET 9, I'd imagine that would be a DIM to this class. Or interface, sorry.
But you can't dim storage, so you could only dim it to throw.
Right.
Yeah, same with the build method, realistically, right? You would just have to say, yep, that's not going to do anything.
So, I mean, you would avoid the binary compatibility problem, but you wouldn't fix the interface.
Well, you'd fix it for when people are using .NET 9. It's there and it works.
I mean,
that's the point of adding, like, even if it's a virtual class or something, it'd be like the same deal, right? You probably just throw.
Yeah, we've done this in the past as well. Like, I mean, I get Jeremy's point. It's just it's the only way to evolve an interface, right? And realistically, this is not the kind of interface we expect anyone to implement, right? They're effectively just implemented by infrastructure at this point.
Correct. Like it would be the generic host in runtime, ASP.NET's web application, potentially Maui. Well, two in ASP.NET. One would be the WASM has its own application builder, and then the normal server-side web application builder, and then Maui. So you have 4.
I'm kind of going to ask the obvious question, but why can't it be a base type?
It's extensions, and everything else is interfaces here. I mean,
right, so you're pointing out, like, could you just like unseal host application builder and say now web application builders derive from it? And
no,
well, either that or
that's
you could introduce a new type that basically is that thing, right?
I don't like it either, like, because it wouldn't work for Maui or the WebAssembly builder either. But
I mean, we also wouldn't want host application builder as is either, because it's, I mean, kind of the same things, right? Like there's a reason there's .abstractions libraries and not .abstractions libraries.
exactly.
And host application builder is in the not .abstractions library, and this one needs
Right,
to be in .abstractions.
But you could make base application builder define these 4 properties and 1 or 2 methods and have no other code in it, basically.
Yeah, pure abstract. It definitely would go against like all of Microsoft extensions.
I mean, you're a bit cheating here, right? Like, I mean, if you're happy to put in DIMs, you don't get to pull the I want pure abstractions card, right? It's one or the other, right? Either you believe into, okay, I'm okay with putting an empty method or putting a method body that throws, or you don't. But like, it's just the same mechanism effectively. It's just that one of them is a bit more.
It's a matter of taste too, right? Like it's what people are comfortable in the space.
So the taste argument,
people write extension methods for interfaces, right? They write extension methods for builder interfaces. Like now they have this like class. It would just be out of place. And there's I don't see the advantage to it.
I mean, the advantage for it is just that we know a little bit more about abstract base types versus DIMs, right? And DIMs have known limitations, right? So it's not like they are perfect in all ways.
Sure, it's not as capable of a base class if you want to start like managing private state and stuff, but
if the very concrete scenario here is to allow extension methods across a bunch of whole different builder types, then you would just do IHostApplicationBuilder 2 and have all of the concrete ones implement it, and now all of your extension methods just work.
Yep. IHab2 extends IHab, and then just change all the concrete types to say they're IHab2.
Yeah.
I mean, that's
Like
the
this-
old way of doing it.
Well,
no,
so-
this is the way of doing it, right?
Yeah,
This is how interfaces work.
We have dims now.
Ish. Yeah. How are you dimming? Because you still are net standard 2.0, right?
Conditionally.
we
Oh,
found
yeah.
if it
Yeah, pound if. They have multi-compiled.
if 6.0 or greater,
Okay. So you're still targeting a retroactive TFM, but not net standard 2.0.
right. Well, net standard 2.0 and NetFX and net, let's say 6 plus, and only net 6 plus gets the dim. So you yourself, to use it, need to be using net 6.0 plus.
Right. And I guess because ASP.NET would have a version, it'd probably be fine. And no, Kevin, it can't be EX4. EX is forbidden by naming guidelines. Numbers are allowed, though. See also our least favorite class.
But I just get the impression we're complicating this well beyond what's needed to actually support the scenario that people care about. Which
In
is,
what
I
ways?
want to build extension methods across all these different types. Like, remove build. If we want to add interfaces in the future, use 2, 3, 4, and boom, problem solved using techniques that we've known about for 20 years.
I mean,
or
so there's a downside of reversing the interface by adding a suffix, because basically it means that anybody who gets an IHostApplicationBuilder now has to effectively try cast to 2, 3, 4, right? And then that just becomes messy.
No one's getting these things. Extension methods are written for these things. So if you have an extension method that requires IHostApplicationBuilder 2 or 3, you take that as your this parameter, and your extension methods will still show up in IntelliSense on the concrete types, because the concrete types will be changed to implement the interfaces.
No, I get that. I'm saying that fundamentally, like the problem when you, so the nice thing with dims is that they're composed, right? So wherever the call site is, you already have the right type, right? The problem is if you say, oh, we add a new interface that is just derived from the old one with a suffix 2, 3, 4, whatever, then depending on where your code is, you're in some method body somewhere, your method took an IHostApplicationBuilder, not the 2, not the 3, and now you want to call a method that was introduced in 2 or 3, right? Then you now have to either change your method, add an overload that takes the other one, or do other unnatural gymnastics to get to the type, right? So it's just, from a usage standpoint, dims are nicer because they just always show up, right? No matter what the types were.
I disagree with that assertion, because the only people who would ever be affected by this are people who are actually writing the extension methods, not the people who are consuming.
No,
Right,
The people who are writing the extension methods would be expected to take whatever interface is necessary for their use case.
No, you're just looking at extension methods. I'm saying, generally speaking, when you have an interface, right? The problem is if you add a new version of that, then nothing passes that around, right? Everything passes it around under the old type, right? Whether it's extension methods or whatever other infrastructure code you have that takes these things, right? So you're guaranteed to stand on the wrong type at that point.
But in the general case, I agree with you, but we're all in violent agreement here that this is not a general purpose interface. This is used very specifically for extension methods.
But it would still be a problem in the domain. If you ship go register my library right now based on IHostApplicationBuilder, if you make an overload extension method that takes IHostApplicationBuilder 2, because now you need to access one of the new properties they added when we extended it, that's now an ambiguous target. You'd have to cast the concrete type to which of the 1 or 2 you wanted to use. So it works for future waves, but it doesn't work for people who participated in wave 1. They'd have to still do a runtime cast inside their body.
Right, to not make an API change. I mean, I think this will be a game time decision, right? Like when we add a new member to the interface, we might be like, oh, we need a new interface because if we want the people to use this method, we want compile time guarantees that it's not going to throw. Or we think that's like not a big risk that people call the dim for reasons, and we do the dim, and we'll decide that.
Yeah, I think that's fair. So basically what we're saying is for now we remove the build method. We can add it later if we want. And then same goes for whatever the other thing was called. What was it? The metrics builder or whatever?
Yeah. iMetrics builder is coming sometime. Hopefully in .NET 8, I hope, but if not.
Yeah, that seems reasonable then. And then, so what happens to all the existing extension methods? Are we effectively just saying copy paste and then changing this parameter to IHostApplicationBuilder? Is that what we're doing?
So which ones are you talking about? The existing ones that are iHostBuilder?
Whatever the existing ones are that are either targeting, whatever they're targeting, basically.
A lot of the existing extension methods just take an iService collection, right? And those are fine to continue existing forever.
Gotcha.
But it's to do multiple things to your host builder, right? Like look at configuration or environment or whatever. Those are existing on iHostBuilder. Yeah, we would tell people, and I've been logging issues on it. I've linked a couple here to also add an IHostApplicationBuilder extension right next to it.
So it's basically for net new consumers that would like to access, I don't know, properties, configuration, environment, logging services, blah, blah, blah. They can now use the interface and don't have to write two of them for the two concrete types that we have, right?
Yeah, sorry to interrupt earlier, but like, in the first wave, there were two methods that targeted iHostBuilder, like in Microsoft extensions that were like use systemd and use Windows service or something like that. And those we were able to kind of rewrite to target iService collection. We had considered whether we needed this interface before, and I initially said maybe not, but there was enough community extension methods for iHostBuilder that weren't as easy to convert that we found to be worthwhile.
And there's some things coming where it's going to be more and more important for configuring these things using configuration and services at the same time. Like we're going to want to do more extension methods like this ourselves.
So new APIs, but nothing in extensions right now needs to like target this. And there's third-party stuff too.
So then basically the only change from the proposal here is remove build and then leave the rest as is. Is that basically what we said?
I think so.
I think so too. We haven't talked about iConfiguration Manager, but it's pretty simple. It's two. The difference between iConfiguration Builder and iConfiguration is iConfiguration Builder is the thing that you like add configuration sources to. So like I get a JSON file or something from Azure or whatever. And then an iConfiguration is where you consume the configuration. And so that's where Configuration Manager, when did you put it in, Stefan? Like in 6? Done at 6, I think?
Yeah, I think it was 6. It was with the introduction of Web Application Builder.
Right. We added Configuration Manager, which bridged both of these. Like you could add sources to it and get configuration from those existing sources. And so iConfiguration Manager is just the abstraction to that.
So I was not quite listening. You're basically saying
I'm just talking about the middle interface, the iConfiguration Manager.
Right. It's for people that need both, basically. They need both the stuff that is on iConfiguration as well as the builder. They need to access configuration as well as initializing other things.
Right. Yep, exactly.
Yeah.
Wait.
Well, I mean, maybe not the same person might not have to do it.
But the new interface iConfiguration Manager you're using up in iHostApplicationBuilder.
Correct. That's why we're introducing it.
But that means you're not just extracting surface. So what does host application builder and web application builder say for configuration right now?
They expose configuration manager, the class on the bottom, the concrete configuration manager class.
And Maui doesn't?
No, Maui does as well. The issue is configuration manager is in the Microsoft.extensions.configuration, not abstractions package. And hosting, and IHostApplicationBuilder is going to be in the hosting abstractions package. And hosting's abstractions references configuration abstractions, but not configuration, not abstractions. I don't know how to say that one. And so it's a layering problem.
It makes sense. Like we almost did this to begin with, like to be safe, but we didn't have like the use case.
Okay, so it's not really just slapping on IHostApplicationBuilder. You're going to have to explicitly implement the configuration property because it won't be a signature match.
Yeah, that one. Well, that one, and then one more that I thought of is host application builder doesn't have a properties property yet. This would add that as well. I probably should have put it in though.
Well, regarding the properties property, I looked at, I think it was iConfiguration Manager, I think. And its properties property is string object, not object object. Was this intentional?
Oh, it's different for between iConfigurations and iHostBuilder. You should have had different kind of properties bags.
Okay, so an object key was intentional, and a non-nullable object value was intentional.
So I took it from Web Application Builder. I'm looking there real quick.
Sorry, I lost the unmute. So what it matches is the host builder context. So it like fits with the rest of Microsoft Extensions hosting, not the rest of Microsoft Extensions configuration. It's not currently on host application builder because I didn't want people to write extension methods on it initially. I was hoping they would target one of the sub properties. But like, yeah, now I mean people do it. So and it's still there in privately for some like shenanigans with diagnostic listeners and testing.
But just to verify, like you did intend for it to be object key, non-nullable object value.
I would say it matches up with
uncommon.
what's in host builder context. And that's what people currently like target because that's like part of the original IHostBuilder interface.
Right. iHostBuilder today has iDictionary object, object.
Oh yeah, it's even right on it. You know, it's not even just the host builder context; it's both. But it's the same.
Right. That's where I took it from was the iHostBuilder, the one with all the callbacks.
Right, and it has the same level of nullability annotations enabled as the proposal is reflecting?
Correct. It'll.
Okay.
Yep.
Same
this
assembly.
interface will go the same. Yep. Yeah, you wouldn't put null in here. You would remove the property from the dictionary if that's what you're intending to do, right? If you wanted to null out this property.
I prefer string keys like configuration. I think that's the main thing, but it is consistent with what's in the space.
Yeah, I see one usage internally that we actually put a type in there for the key when we're using IHostBuilder. So as proposed is what I think should be.
Agreed.
just that side question about like, since host application builder doesn't have properties today, should have I put that explicitly in the proposal just for like future me? Would it have helped here?
I think so. Is it going to be public? That's the question, right? Is it explicitly implemented, or is it just now a new public member on the type?
To start with explicit, maybe. And if we have, I don't know. That's a good question.
I don't know either. Like, it seems kind of weird to use directly on the type because then you own it, and like, what state are you keeping track of? Use a variable, like. But at the same time, like, you don't often do explicit interface implementations unless like you're actively trying to hide something.
I don't think it hurts to put it publicly.
Yeah.
Because we're going to put it on the interface, and it's going to have to be there forever on the interface.
And it's public on Web Application Builder. I guess that's the question too. I assume so, maybe. Oh, we're going to have to add it there too, aren't we?
Yeah, it's not on.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. Because you initially said you copied it from it there, and you meant IHostBuilder, which makes more sense. But because I was surprised, I'm like, huh, like we did have that there then. Okay.
Yeah, I think just, for me, showing that the type, like the presentation right now makes it look like this is just a type decorator. But showing that, oh, yeah, we're going to need to explicitly mask out configuration and then we're either going to explicitly implement properties as a no-op bucket or, and we have to add a properties thing here. Like, just showing, yes, we're changing this type to make the interface, and it actually shows that more thought went into the interface, I think, instead of just saying we're extracting some properties and they kind of work by duck typing. So obviously it's hard to show the one for ASP.NET. I mean, you can say what you think it'll be, but that's Stefan's other review board meeting, so they could decide to do something different there.
We'll try to keep it consistent.
So the full changes to host application builder should be implement IHostApplicationBuilder, expose a public iDictionary object of properties, like not explicitly implemented, and then it'll have to explicitly implement the configuration property from IHostApplicationBuilder because its configuration returns a configuration manager, the sealed class at the bottom. That's it.
Seems fine, asterisk.
And people who love mocking everything in their unit tests and like unit testing program man will just like appreciate this. No. It really is for the extension methods, but that is a byproduct.
Okay, any more concerns, thoughts?
I don't want to ask the question, but I'm going to. Why do we care about the layering? Or a different, why is there an explicit abstractions assembly? Everywhere inside the BCL that we tried doing a primitives or abstractions, I believe over the years have all gone away. We've merged them with the next layer because the layering provided no value in the end.
It's not actually true. I mean, they're all part of Net Standard. I mean, all part of Net Core App, but like system networking primitives or system net primitives is still its own thing.
It hasn't had concrete things moved into it. I don't think we got rid of the assembly, but I think that it became things that weren't primitives because of layering.
There are things in it that aren't primitives, but there are things in it that aren't abstractions, but they're all primitives.
Fair enough. Just it seems like the second interface is we wouldn't be adding it if these two things were in one assembly, and it just makes me wonder if extensions actually sees that there's still value in the multiple assemblies, or if they should start collapsing.
So I had this discussion a lot last week with the new Microsoft Extensions diagnostics stuff that added both an abstractions layer and not abstraction in the concrete layer if you want to. And I actually like went through some of these exact same questions and arguments, right? Of like, do we really need a dot abstractions here to have? I mean, today it just has one interface in it, right? Like iMetrics Builder, iMetrics Factory, or some meter factory. That's what it's called. And like some of the points made there are relevant here, right? Like these extension libraries, like let's just say Steel Toe is the one that I showed above, right? Like if you started collapsing all these abstractions down, you'll pretty quickly get into a case where like you reference like the Microsoft extensions dependency injection, the concrete implementation. And like people don't want to reference something like that because there's other DI implementations out there. And so it does keep an architecture purity and like less references in your code.
Another kind of example of this is, oh, sorry.
Nope, go ahead.
Like DI abstractions, right? We're talking about named services and like another issue right now. And we're like, oh, can we just add things like straight to the service descriptor, which is in abstractions, right? It's like we could, and then we have to think about like, okay, what if the abstractions package by itself gets hoisted? Is that going to break our service provider? And you might say, oh, well, that's a reason to put it together. Like if it's all tightly wound in one thing, better. But actually no, because then at least we feel the same pain that like we're on the same level in some ways as, you know, other third-party, DI containers. So we have to like solve those things. I don't know. I do like the purity is the point.
Yeah, I mean, like, so if there were other, if not everything in abstractions only has the one implementation of a thing in a more concrete layer, then I guess that means that there is still being value in it. But you can't say it reduces references because anybody who uses the DI system needs to also reference the abstraction. So there's a cost to the layering. But anyway, if you think there's value, that's fine. I just, in the pregnant pause, I felt like I had to ask the question.
In the hosting layer, for sure, I think there's value. Like if you compare the differences in dependencies between hosting abstractions and hosting, there's quite a lot that hosting pretty much brings in all of extensions, where hosting abstractions only needs to bring in, configuration abstractions, DI abstractions, file provider abstractions. So once you get high enough,
like Maui brings in hosting abstractions, but not hosting, right? If I understand correctly, or no, they do bring in some concrete stuff, but do they actually bring in, like, because I know they don't use IHostApplicationBuilder, right?
Right. Yeah, I don't think it references hosting at all, to tell you the truth. It just references the lower layer extension stuff.
Right.
So yeah, in hosting, I mean, even all the logging things that it references, right? Like console, debug, event log, event source, logging, all that stuff. Same with configuration. But to be fair, I had the same exact questions about the diagnostic stuff that I think got approved maybe 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago. There was a whole new abstractions assembly added for that one.
Fair enough. As long as somebody's thinking about it and not just doing inertia.
So what I'm hearing is we are fine.
Yep.
I feel like we discussed this to death. And we went further than that. All right. Hex string.
Now we're bouncing back to Jeremy K.
Oh, is he actually on the call now? Yes.
I did. Yeah, I did not get the scheduling email, and APIReview.net did not have today is having a meeting, so I was not expecting
That is
to be on the docket today.
that is totally fine. It's there was an email that wasn't sent, so you didn't miss anything.
Okay. So as part of our interop work for .NET 8, we've been producing source generators to make it easy to use COM. This issue proposes an analyzer and a code fix to enable people to easily move from built-in COM import to the new source generated COM interface attributes and that whole model, as well as providing analyzers that report diagnostics for common cases where users may, when using the code fix to move over to the new system, might have usage of APIs that only work with the old system. So you can give people notifications of, hey, this might not, like this is not going to work, or this will not work in the scenarios we tell you you should be using these APIs.
So how much of this is manual? Like afterwards, is almost everything kind of control dottable, or do you have some things where it's just like, yeah, you're holding it wrong, please change the way you do it?
So if you're using just like p invokes and library import, and that's how all your interop is, if you're basically using DLL import and COM import, then you can run the code fix to move these types from COM import to generated COM interface, and then the code fix to move the DLL imports to library import, and then you're all set. If you're using some of these members on Marshall, we have alternative APIs we can direct you to. But for some of them, we have APIs we can direct you to. We have other ones that we don't support that scenario in source generated COM. For example, the create aggregated object, we do not support aggregation. The release COM object, we don't have an alternative for that. We have an alternative for final release COM object, but it requires you to use the type in a way that would be hard to write a code fix for. Most of these APIs that are the reported diagnostic ones are places where it would be hard for us to provide a code fix.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense.
So in the
but
third bullet, go ahead, Timo.
Sorry, but I assume that in the general case, for everything people would have gotten in the past, they either get a fixer or a diagnostic, right? There are no patterns where we don't recognize anything and just, kind of are silent.
Yeah, that's the goal. The goal is for every API that a user might use that we know for sure would expect a built-in COM object, we will tell them, hey, this doesn't work with source-generated COM, and say either these alternatives exist or this scenario is not supported.
So on the third bullet, it says COM visible true plus it's COM visible true plus generated COM interface is bad.
Yeah, so it's a COM visible true on a class type that implements a source generated COM type, and the user is trying to use the built-in COM hosting we added in .NET Core 3.0.
Okay, so it's not suggest replacing COM visible true with a generated COM interface, even though that will have different visibility semantics. It's if you've put both of these things on, it doesn't work the way that you think it does.
Yeah, it's saying if you do COM visible true and you have COM hosting enabled, you're trying to expose this using built-in COM, a generated COM interface, attributed interface will not participate in that system.
Okay.
And we'd offer these code fixes we'd offer the analyzer and code fix to convert as a suggestion, because there's these cases where you can end up in a torrent state and get other diagnostics that we tell you you're in a torrent state.
Okay. And are any of the fixers, like if you have com import and you replace it with generated com interface, does that do everything you need it to do, or does that give you a to-do list of homework?
So that does, if you're using the interface types with library import, then that does what you need it to do. The idea is if you're starting from DLL import and com import, then you can use the convert to library import fix and the convert to generated com interface fix, and you're done.
Okay. But you don't have to go change the shape of any methods, remove or add any other properties, etc. Or if you do, the fixer can deal with all of that for you. Okay.
Yeah, like the removing the shadowing methods, we can have the fixer do that for you.
Okay. And then I assume the fact that there's not a current replacement for create aggregated object means you don't think that people care? That like
aggregation is very expensive for us to implement, just in terms of it has a lot of design work, and we don't want to do it unless we have to. So we are putting it off until we have customers say, we have enough customers telling us we want aggregated com objects in source generated com.
Right, but this is, we're not going to be creating a lot of customer ire by, it says, oh, you should replace your com import generated com interface, and then they're like, wait, but now I can't call create aggregated object anymore. That's important to me. You think that that's like a handful of people, not like everyone.
Yeah, I don't think there's going to be a ton of people. I don't think there's going to be a ton of people specifically calling create aggregated object. Most people that would be calling that are probably using the built-in com semantics to create aggregated com objects. Mostly through CLB imp and that sort of model. It's very rare to, I think it's pretty rare to manually use these APIs, but I couldn't find our API usage tool to see how much these are used. I know the get and set com object data are slightly more commonly used, but you can easily replicate that with a conditional weak table on the side.
Fair enough. Yeah, so I'm just making sure that we're not, that of people who would be presented with the fixer of com import to generated com interface, you expect that the overwhelming majority of them will have no downstream issues.
Yes.
Okay. Just making sure we're not setting people up for, we offer them a fixer, they spend an hour doing work, and then it tells them this thing that was fundamental to your scenario isn't implemented yet. Haha, undo everything. So.
Yeah, basically, as soon as they run the fixer from com import to generated com interface, like they should very quickly see that it pops for it. I think. I know it's not perfect in the sense that like we can't figure out the runtime type, but I think that the chance of someone passing around a system.type, just a regular system.type instance that was calculated somewhere else into create aggregated object is probably very unlikely.
All right.
Okay.
Sounds good to me.
Pretty used anyway. Actually, yeah, that one's just of T. That one's generic. Doesn't even take a system.type, so that makes it, yeah, harder to mishandle.
Fair enough.
So I have a meta question. Did we ever get any feedback? Because I think we have a very similar analyzer for changing DLL import to native library import, correct? So
yeah,
did we ever get any feedback on whether people who are multi-targeting ever ran into issues with that?
The only person that I've heard that had an issue with multi-targeting is when we moved system drawing common out of .NET Runtime upstack into WinForms, because in Runtime we have multi-targeting support that we do not ship because we do not want that maintenance burden. And so they had to manually revert back because they were multi-targeting. That was the only time we have heard from anybody that multi-targeting has been painful.
So it sounds like we don't expect any such feedback here either. I imagine it's going to be a very similar paradigm.
Yeah, I think it's going to be very similar. I think what is a more likely scenario is our partners in the interop space across the company for various different tools are more likely to reuse our underlying infrastructure once we make that public, than try to use one tool on one target and another tool on another. Yeah. Our customers, our main customers for the common interface generator are all going to be .NET 8 and newer.
Cool.
Right. So far, I think the only issue was that I read bullet 3 wrong. So seems like ship it.
Awesome.
Did we ever
Sounds
talk
good.
about the
Thanks, Dad.
severity? Presumably it's warning.
I think so. The code fixes will be suggestion. The diagnostics of this will not work at runtime would be warning.
So you only want that if you're looking at this line, you see that there's a blue squiggle under it?
Yeah, that's what we have for convert to library import by default.
Okay.
We have, hey, you can, like, hey, you should move, but no reason to break your build ever if
Fair
you
enough.
don't want to move.
That's
'Cause
what we've done in
there are
general
some
for-
times we can't move.
That's what we've done in general for our analyzers that suggest moving to something else, or in general, or you could make your life better or faster or whatever. Those have all been info. We've reserved warnings for basically, if you do this, you are going to have a bad time.
Fair enough.
Yeah, warning. Yeah, my understanding is, like, we generate warnings when it's going to fail at runtime, and we're sure of it, because we don't generate errors ever. So that's kind of what fell into the warning bucket.
Yeah, and I guess warning would be a nightmare if anybody was source sharing across targets in a way that wasn't easy to detect. Like,
Yeah.
.NET runtime source common.
Yes. Thankfully, we do not have a ton of COM code in .NET runtime source common, so that will help. That helps simplify our story. We will not be doing any even unsupported down level work for this generator. That makes us very happy.
Congratulations.
Thanks, you guys.
Thanks for explaining it and hopping on the call. Sorry for the lost notice.
Not a problem. I'm just glad I was able to catch it.
So we talked about this one. No convert try from hex string. Who has context on this one? Who marked it?
So we actually reviewed and approved this one before, and then Stephen
I had a
unmarked
question
it.
on it.
Yeah.
In particular, there was a decision that was made to conflate multiple things into a false return value, and I just wanted to confirm that we really know what we're doing there, because anyone who is using this, and we often, especially for formatting, we expect people to write these while loops where they're like, while the destination isn't large enough, allocate more space. And if you used this here for that, you would blow up with an if there was invalid input. So I just want to make sure we actually thought this through.
Yeah, and I was looking at this after Stephen had unmarked it, and it's very inconsistent with how we do our other try APIs that take a span. Normally, try format and try parse and all those APIs, they throw for invalid input, and they only return false if the destination buffer was too small. And this is the actual ask at the top of this was to have the try API so that the user could return false if it's invalid, and so it gets kind of complicated in that sense, and because it's doing both sides of the input and output.
Do we have operation
These-
status APIs on Convert right now? 'Cause
Sound
that would
like
solve
things
this.
I would have very aggressively pushed for, assuming I was in the review. So I feel like somebody tried dismissing them as irrelevant. But I am happy to hear other people bring up this same cause.
Sure, I can do it. Like, because I was on team, like, let's conflate these. I know that sounds bad. But the argument was, like, you know how many bytes it's going to take. And, you know, I think there was also discussion of just removing the out. But people were like, the out is, like, consistent with the other APIs. But then it's inconsistent with how the return value works. Yeah, like if everyone who's like all the other buffer writing APIs are completely different from this, fine. I think that was the other issue, is that there was like no alternative proposal that didn't throw, that people were like, oh, that's obviously like better in not conflating things.
Right. Operation status is the way that we would unconflate these.
That's true. People did bring that up in the other API review. But no one, like, yeah, seriously pushed for that.
Yeah, that also means you would, if you did an operation status API, you would drop the try prefix. I don't think we have operation status APIs on the convert type, but I mean, I guess there's no reason we couldn't add it. Normally, we stick that in system buffers.
First time for everything?
Yeah, as the owner of system buffers, no one knows about system buffers. And one of the biggest things I have to do for system buffers is someone asks for something and I have to say, oh, it's here, buried like 3 namespaces deep under system buffers, binary primitives, blah. And then they're like, oh, I didn't know this existed. I expected it to be on BitConverter, or I expected it to be under system text, or wherever else.
You need to follow up with "you're welcome."
Job security, man.
So one question I have is, so why are we, so basically it's a deviation from what we did for try from base 64 though, right? Didn't we end up in a world where this basically throws for both as well?
What the notes they're saying.
Yeah, that's what the notes are saying, so that's why I'm asking. Because basically, if it works there, like, why would it not work here? I mean, to some extent, I think the argument was, you know what the size of the buffer is, if the format is correct.
Right, I think the problem is you don't know if it was correct.
Well, even if, because
No.
I think right now our hex string processing doesn't allow white space, but even if we were to expand it in the future, you do with domain knowledge have an upper bound of it as the input length divided by 2.
Right. I think that was the
And-
argument. So then if you pass me the wrong buffer size, then, well, that's easy. And if you say that, oh, okay, we don't throw, we just make it convenient and just say if we return false as well if the buffer size is too small. And then it's just, well, you guessed wrong. Please try again.
So the expectation is that a caller of this method, after it returns false, checks whether the destination was greater than or equal to source.length divided by 2 in order to discern whether it was because of invalid input or destination being too small. Is that the expected usage?
That's the thing I don't quite remember. So like in the notes say convenience, so I believe it's worth to return false for both cases. I would probably just say let's throw for a destination too small, because that's user error, right? You just called the API wrong. Versus the other one.
I was going to say it's not exactly convenient to have to do that check to know why it returned false.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I also feel like, that's, yeah, I don't know how you write the check afterwards, right? Yeah, because if you can write the check, you could have just multiplied the number correctly or divided the number correctly beforehand, right? So,
yeah. I mean, I think it comes back a little bit to if we add support for white space in the future, which if we don't have it now, we would probably only add it with an overload. And that you could get an answer smaller than source.length divided by 2. And so it's like, will you please fit in the buffer space I have available? But since we don't support white space and probably won't without an overload, the answer, it will always be source.
Isn't that the general pattern? So. It's like you give me a buffer and then I tell you how many things I've written. So like it's always valid to return less than what the buffer was, right? That's already the case today, right? So
right, but I don't think that try from hex string is capable of doing that. I think if it succeeds, it always says source.length divided by 2.
No, I get that. I'm saying that if we would just change the behavior, like, I mean, nothing in the API has to change for that, right?
We would be making an assertion to everyone that their input domains now allow white space when maybe they didn't think they should have. So changing, being more flexible in a fundamental parser is one man's bug fix is another man's bug. So
you're basically saying you would just have an overload that just basically also to specify whether you want white space to be allowed or not, rather than...
That would be my guess if people who are currently annoyed by our lack of white space support, like, right. I don't know, Kevin Jones, felt like complaining, that we would probably end up with an overload instead of changing the behavior of this method.
Right, but there's nothing to do with the buffer size and how much was written, right? It's just the opt-in behavior to the parsing, right, that you're objecting to, which, that would I understand.
Right, well, because then that version would have, now you'd have the, that I have an invalid hex, or my buffer, you needed more than the space that I had left. I know what the upper bound would be, but I don't know what the actual answer is. That's the whole reason I'm trying to call this method. And so it gets weird. And we could say that the white space accepting overload never gets a try. It only gets an operation status because, oh my God, so hard. But
my own opinion is that we did the wrong thing with try from base 64 because we exposed that back in like .NET Core 2.1. We should have these return operation status because they really are transcoding APIs, much like UTF-8 and UTF-16, where we also use operation status. And since we're both having to validate an input and output to an arbitrary length buffer, we should just have the operation status say what the actual result was. Is it done? Do we need more space? Was it invalid?
Yeah, I think it would be reasonable for us to add the operation status overload instead of a try. And if somebody wants to make the collapsed purpose try, they can do that in terms of the operation status.
Is that operation status, is this also for one-shot scenarios, or is it always when you do things in a loop?
Can be used for both.
Yeah.
The way that you use it is determined by if it tells you data was consumed or not.
So basically, you either have that output type or you don't, right? Jeremy, is that what you're saying?
Like with an operation status, it gives you two outs. How much source data did I consume and how much destination data did I write? So it can say, I hit destination too small, I consumed this much and wrote this much. You're allowed now to slice from that consume point before you call it again, and without making it repeat the work. If it couldn't consume an entire atomic piece of data, then it won't have called it consumed before it returned. So you could start over and have it repeat the work, or you could slice and move forward and only do the future work.
Which is really overall more powerful because you can use that for regular parsing where you want a one-shot. You can use it for scenarios more like UTF-8 parser where you want to parse until you hit the first non-valid character and then continue from there. It's if we were doing this from day one, like the entire BCL, I think it would be nice if more of our core APIs were operation status based, just because that allows people to do the right thing regardless.
So then what I'm hearing is we kind of take these APIs, copy paste, change the return value from bool to operation status, and then what's the naming convention for those? Clearly not try anymore, right?
Just drop the try.
Yeah, just be from hex string.
From hex string to hex string. Okay.
Yeah. The only real downside to operation status, as opposed to all of the other APIs, is that there is a little bit of a learning curve to it because it is an enum that returns one of 4 different values.
Yeah, but the enums are named and they're super intuitive because it's literally done, needs more data, invalid data, and destination too small.
Yeah, and if all you care about is doing a one-shot, then literally the only value you care about is done. If it returns anything else, treat it as a failure. But maybe it's one of those things that, like, the very first time you try using it as a one-shot, maybe you have to read the docs. But after that, the pattern's pretty consistent.
Right, and if you really don't, if you're in the scenario of I want to try and I want to fail, if anything goes wrong, we have the throwing version of the API that does that.
Operation status is much more complicated than that.
Yeah, you want to add another out parameter. It's bytes written and
thingies consumed.
Yeah.
Yeah. Consumed before written.
Yep. Source, destination, things consumed, things written. Where things is bytes, chars, or the third one. Items?
Elements, items, yeah. Whatever you want to call it.
I will eventually find the guideline for this.
Yeah, the UTF-8
values.
Or I guess the one we expose on base 64 is input, output, and then consumed written.
Yeah.
So it's basically input, output, input, output.
Yeah, and the things that make these a shortcut for one-shots are, like, if it returns done, you can assume the entire input was consumed, for instance. Yeah. So you don't have to check the chars consumed.
And so we'd have cares consumed, and then cares consumed again, and then bytes consumed for the third one, it looks like.
Yep.
Where would this go before the bytes written?
Yeah.
Yep.
So it is... Okay, the first one is chars consumed. The second one is chars consumed. And then the third one is bytes consumed. Yeah, now the API is no longer very nice to use.
The 2 hex string can easily be a try because you can't have invalid input bytes. There's only one. It's only capable of returning done or destination too small, so we can collapse that into a try.
I guess that's fair.
For which one?
The third one.
The 2 hex string.
Because any byte is valid, right?
Yeah. All source bytes can be converted to hexadecimal output. The only failure mode for that try method is destination too small, so it makes sense as a try.
So then I guess that would look like the original, right?
2 hex string would become the original proposed try to hex string, yes.
And then we would still have our chars written, right? Because, yeah.
Yep. Just for composition.
And that one's also easy because destination just has to be 4 times the source length, right?
2 times?
Yeah, 2 times. I was thinking in terms of bytes. So 4 times the bytes, 2 times the length.
All right, so then this is what I have.
Assuming they both say out at bytes written semicolon, looks good to me.
Cool. JSON. Eric.
All right. Okay, so this was reviewed a couple of weeks ago while I was out, and I think the final decision was pending on certain clarifications. So I've effectively updated the naming of the method. Could you scroll down, please, to the proposal? Call the method with added modifier, because effectively what this extension is doing is that it acts as a combinator on any interface, and it's wrapping it inside a new interface that adds the modifier effect to the output that the inner resolver is producing. So it's not mutating the original input, it's producing a new input with an added effect.
And the modifiers are allowed to themselves chain, and the additional one comes later than the previous ones?
Correct.
Okay. Just making sure that the order is well defined in the context. Yeah, when we had talked about it, we were having issue with the singular plural, and then in the alternative designs it talked about a plural, and it was unclear if it was additive or replacement. So the addition of the word added satisfies that to me. So I'm good with the new proposal.
So the only thing that changed is the name, right? Sort of with modifier, we just say with added modifier, I guess.
Right. So the confusion and the place that this came, we didn't have prior art, is that there's a modifiers plural property, and this wanted to add a single modifier. Sorry, was with modifier, and it was unclear if that with meant it was replacing it with a collection of one, or if it was appending to the collection.
Right.
And
so
we solved that with the word added.
Yeah. For clarification, there exists a class that implements this interface, which contains a list of modifiers called modifiers, and of course that is mutable, and you can add or remove actions from that. Basically, this is response to feedback that other implementations of IJsonTypeInfoResolver would need the same functionality. So yeah, extending the same thing to for example, source-generated contexts, but obviously because it's acting on interfaces, there's no concept of modification, it's append only.
So this might be a dumb question. Why not just add modifier at that point?
To the interface.
That implies mutation.
Exactly. I think added is not doing enough work here. Like, right? Like this. We had this conversation before you were here, Eric, in the last API review. But I think with modifier is fine. Like, I don't think people would think it's replacing. It's not with modifiers, which would maybe seem more like.
Well, that was the alternate, because that's part of where we got the confusion. Is the alternative design talked about a params version called with modifiers, and then we're like, well, now that one just sounds like replacement. So.
That one I buy more.
Yeah. So I think the added helps more if there is a future intention of doing the params multiple call add.
fair.
So just to push back on the add applies mutation, we have the other cases elsewhere where we basically have add, remove, insert as the operations for things that are immutable. To me, the argument that it's implying mutation only makes sense if you have both mutation and non-mutation on the same type. If your entire type is effectively immutable, or at least the interface you expose for the type is immutable, where the only thing you can ever do is get new instances back, I think it's fine.
It's so subtle though, because it's an extension method, and like the actual concrete type is mutable. Like, yes, because it's an interface, it's not. But like that is super subtle when it's only an interface because it's an extension method versus.
So
an
you say it's
method.
mutable. How do you mutate in it? Because there's nothing on it that allows you to mutate it.
Is it if you take the actual default type info resolver, it just has a modifiers thing that you can mutate.
Right, but such an implementation would necessitate downcasting on the input to some concrete class that implements it and then mutating that. We could do that, although I think most people wouldn't assume that.
Right. I guess the point is if I already had a default JSON type info resolver, this would still be an extension method on that type. Right.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Unless you think people don't have that often, so therefore it's not important.
Right, and you would then have .add modifier returns a wrapping on a JSON thingy, and .modifiers.add does something different.
Right.
Yep.
But that's also, I guess, it depends on how you want to chain them together, I guess. I mean, I'm generally fine with added. I don't think it's bad. It's just that we generally don't do that, right? If you look at all the Rosin APIs, they are just, very simple calling conventions they don't have with edit. They just call it add.
Right, but everywhere. Oh, just add. I was gonna say because the with pattern, everything that I know of, where anything is using with is always replace and not.
Exactly. So that's why.
Adding.
I mean, there's also the precedent of withing in records, right? When you with a record, you create a new copy.
Yes, but basically the point is that the withers normally set a single property to whatever you're passing to it. So it's a replace. You get a new instance where the thing is replaced, right?
Yeah.
Which is why with edit is a bit of an odd combination. Yeah. But it's also, I mean, it's clear. I think nobody's surprised by what it does, I think.
Mm-hmm. I think just with would be bad, and I think just add if you are looking at the concrete type where the extension method would show up in IntelliSense, that would be confusing. That one of them is modifying the collection on your current thing, and another one is making a new thing that you may not have actually paid attention to the return value of. So I think with added solves both camps without being too ugly.
What is the type here of default? Source generation context.default?
Source generation context.
Yeah, and this guy here. Oh, it's literally of type source generation context?
Yeah.
So are there people likely to ever stand on a default JsonTypeInfoResolver then?
It's in the example code of like how you do it today. But
it will show up in IntelliSense in any case, so people will be intrigued to use it.
Yeah, it's in the same namespace.
Sure. I mean, to me, it's kind of like I don't know enough about the API. Like if people very often deal with default JsonTypeInfoResolver, it's a good argument. If it's you have to literally type it out, but nobody ever does it, then it's less strong of an argument, I guess. But yeah, I mean, it's fine. Seems like everybody wants the with added modifier. So I'll stop arguing now. Is it partial static or static partial? I can never remember. But I think only one order compiled.
I believe partial must be followed by the word class or struct.
So then I guess it's static.
So static partial. But I think I get it wrong about half the time because I think of it as a static class that I have partialified instead of a partial class that is static.
The class is partially static.
This part.
So we have 10 minutes left.
Can we try support awaiting a task without throwing and see if how far we get?
Sure.
Sounds optimistic for 10 minutes.
Okay. And there's another one people have in mind.
Yeah, there should be one. 85893.
Sorry, say
Which
that.
Stephen will.
Which
It's
one?
the vector. Yep,
Yeah.
which Stephen should also be happy about.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, so the basic premise of this is that the language doesn't have support for essentially bridging generic constraints today. So, and there are many contexts where we want to use vectorization, including from methods that are generic. And the vector API is being constrained to struct massively limits that. We already have APIs like vector of t dot is supported that tells you if the actual underlying t is supported, because even the struct constraint is too broad for what these types actually support. So the proposal is basically let's just drop the constraint, allow this to be used in the context where we want to be able to use it, and users have the APIs to ensure that they remain correct in the face of everything.
So which types are we talking about? Because there's no listing here.
So vector 64, 128, 256, and 512 of t, and then vector of t in system numerics.
They're all in. Okay, no, they're in intrinsics. That's why I don't see them.
Yeah, the sized ones are in intrinsics, and then the unsized one is in numerics.
The one that
And then
really
just-
gets me is like the you can't check is supported because it won't compile. It's just funny.
It's already told you no. Right. So all things that are supported are structs, but not all structs are supported.
Yep.
Yeah, removing the keyword's fine.
Yeah, the biggest downside to this, and the only reason I really felt it was worth taking to API review, is because it's going from a more restrictive to a less restrictive constraint. That is no constraint. We will never be able to add the constraint back in the future. I don't think that's really an issue here. We've resolved basically all of the issues. There's potentially some investigation that will need to be done to make sure that native AOT and mono AOT in particular still handle this correctly. Because the struct constraint used to basically tell them this can't be a class type, so you can assume that it doesn't need system.canon support. But we should be able to specialize it anyways in those AOT scenarios if need be.
All right, so I think I got it all. And I think we have convinced ourselves that removing a constraint is never a breaking change, right?
Right. It's not part of the type signature, so it's also why you can't overload based on constraint.
All right, done. I guess now we can look at these guys, because clearly this task one is too big.
Yeah, I mean, if we don't want to try tackling Steve's thing, then there's a ASN reader proposal 86723. It's a one-liner.
And that GUID one there, it is conceptually simple, but there was enough enough commentary from the community wanting a different thing that we probably want to spend, you know, the extra 10 minutes laying out what the community wanted, why we're not doing it. That way it's all recorded on API review and stuff.
So this one you want just from the constructor to copy effectively?
Yeah, the ASN reader has a lot of state, both what current memory of byte it's looking at and rules that you used when you created it. And there are cases that you want to save that state and then do some inspection and then be able to pop back up to the state that you were previously, and the copy constructor will let you do that.
So the
It's
reader
basically just get to say clone the state.
Oh, sorry, you clone the reader with itself. I see. Okay. Yep, makes sense to me.
Yeah, and so then this would just encompass any other potential future state.
I mean, this might be a dumb question. Why not just have a method called clone that gives you back an instance?
We can do that too. I know we have introduced clone methods on types. We did it on the that JSON DOM thing that I did that nobody likes, and where the conclusion was, as long as we don't say iClonable, it's fine. So yeah, we can call it
You want to return
public
the actual
ASN
type.
reader. Yeah, public ASN reader clone of no arguments. You were saying something, Stefan?
A bad joke. I was just saying we could like try to be like C++ and implement the assignment operator as clone.
I think C# doesn't allow you to override that because Anders had opinions, and I agree with those opinions.
Yeah, I've never tried such a thing. That makes a lot of sense. Copy constructors are kind of annoying when I go and try to review C++ code because it's very hidden.
Yeah.
Well, that's what they're convenient though.
Yeah.
All right, let me do that one. Still have 4 minutes left. All right, what else can we do?
Yeah, Kevin, I think we'll just dock it to say that it's a shallow state clone, not a deep memory clone.
The clone works the way it should. It's a perfect clone.
The report inefficient use of sets should be pretty fast. It's the same thing we've done in else, just different use case. This is an analyzer. We've done the same thing for dictionaries, where basically we see if you're doing a lookup followed by some operation, and that operation also does the lookup, and just combine them into one. So you don't need to do if not set.contain set.add. You can just do set.add. Or if you needed to know, you wanted to do some other operation after, you could do if set.add or if not set.add, because it returns a Boolean indicating whether it was already there.
Do we have a fixer for this in other cases? And can we have a fixer here? Or is it
yes and yes?
Annoying. Okay, because it wasn't tagged as fixer. So.
All right, I think that's enough for today. Then I see you guys on Thursday, right? Thursdays we can do, right?
Yep.
Yeah,
Thank you.
That one's even still on the calendar. So I think if you hit the calendar, sorry, the schedule tab up top, I think it still says 9 on the public calendar for some reason.
Yeah, for some reason the one has the wrong time zone apparently. I don't know why that is, but I just fixed that. All right. Then I see you guys on Thursday.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.